My name is Elena Cross. I am 29 years old, and for a living, I step into broken companies and figure out which beam is about to snap first. The morning my family cut me off, I was in a glass conference room in downtown Chicago, 5 minutes away from saving a deal that would have put 7 figures on the table. My phone lit up once, then again, then a third time. I ignored it until the screen kept flashing against my notes like it wanted blood. The first message was from my mother. She said they had made a decision and I was no longer family. The second came from my father less than 10 seconds later, short and clean, saying he agreed, and that I should not make this harder than it had to be. Then my brother sent a laughing reply, like he had been waiting for that moment longer than anyone. I did not cry. I did not call. I did not beg to know what lie they had told themselves this time to make it feel righteous. I just stared at the screen, thought about the papers they wanted me to sign the night before, thought about the money they expected me to risk, thought about how quickly love turns into punishment when you finally say no. So I typed one word back, understood. Then I stepped out of the meeting, made one phone call of my own, and pulled the support they did not even realize was keeping them alive. I left the family chat, turned off my location, and went silent. By the next evening, my phone was filling with messages I did not bother opening. Before I tell you what happened 48 hours later, tell me where you are listening from and what the weather feels like there. I want to know how far this story travels before it reaches the part they never saw coming. By the time I landed back in Chicago the next morning, I had 32 missed calls, 19 voicemails, and so many texts that the notification bubble looked unreal. I still did not answer. I went straight from the airport to my office, poured cold coffee into a paper cup, and sat down with the only people whose panic actually mattered to me, my legal team and my finance director. At 8:12, my mother sent her first message that sounded less like exile and more like fear. Elena, call me right now. At 8:14, my father sent one that tried to sound firm and failed. You have made your point. Put everything back before noon. At 8:16, my brother finally stopped laughing and started cursing. What did you do? I stared at the screen for a second, then handed my phone face down to Naomi Reed, the attorney I had trusted for 6 years. She did not ask if I was all right. She knew better. She just slid a stack of documents across the table and tapped the highlighted sections. The revolving credit line for Cross Urban Development was frozen at 7:03 that morning because the primary personal guarantee had been withdrawn and the bank had flagged a material change in risk. The bridge capital I had privately extended through one of my investment entities had also been called back, according to terms they had signed and never bothered to read. That meant payroll would be delayed. A concrete delivery would be stopped. The city inspection fee could not clear, and the lender had a right to review the entire file again. My father had spent years walking into rooms pretending he ran that company by force of will. The truth was uglier and much smaller. I had been the quiet line holding the whole thing together. At 9:21, Caleb Ross, the chief financial officer they had pushed out 3 months earlier, joined our meeting by video. He looked exhausted, but not surprised. He said the company had less than 5 days of real liquidity even before I pulled my support. He said my brother had been moving money between accounts to hide cost overruns. He said my mother kept insisting the anniversary event needed to stay lavish because image was everything, and investors trusted appearances. He said my father knew things were bad, but he kept choosing delay over truth. Then he said the one thing that made me stop breathing for a moment. They told the board you were emotional and unstable. They said removing you from the project would calm the lenders. I laughed when he said it, but it came out hard and empty. Emotional. That was the word people used when a woman stopped acting like an ATM with a heartbeat. Around noon, my mother appeared in the lobby of my building wearing sunglasses too large for her face, and the kind of white coat she only wore when she wanted to look expensive in public. She demanded to come upstairs. Security called me. I told them to send her away. 10 minutes later, she texted, "You cannot do this to your own family." I finally replied with 6 words. "You already said I was not." Then I blocked her again. That afternoon my brother switched tactics. First he threatened me, then he insulted me, then he begged. He said contractors were calling nonstop. He said one investor was already talking to lawyers. He said I knew how much pressure he was under. He said I was about to destroy years of work over a stupid fight. A stupid fight. That was what he called forcing me to risk my name, my assets, and my future so he could keep pretending he was a businessman. My father left the only voicemail I listened to. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. Elena, enough. Come home tonight and we will discuss this like adults. But I had tried that version for years. Every calm conversation ended the same way. My mother would cry. My brother would blame. My father would smooth it over. And somehow I would leave carrying their problem like it had been mine all along. Not this time. By the second night, the cracks were wide open. A supplier filed notice that no more materials would be released without payment. 2 junior employees quit. One local blogger posted a piece about rumors around the family project. My mother began calling distant relatives to tell them I was punishing everyone because I had always hated my brother. She forgot one thing. Lies travel fast, but financial records travel farther. I went home, shut the curtains, and sat in the dark with my phone buzzing across the table like a trapped insect. 48 hours earlier, they had decided I was no longer family. Now they were learning the cost of that decision, and they still had no idea how much worse the truth was going to get. The part people never understand about betrayal is that it rarely begins with one dramatic moment. It starts in small doses, a favor here, a signature there, a request that sounds temporary, a crisis that somehow becomes your responsibility because you are the dependable one. I was 23 the first time my father asked me to help the company for real. Back then, Cross Urban Development was already carrying more debt than he admitted, but he still had enough charm to keep banks smiling and enough pride to call it a temporary squeeze. He needed someone who could talk numbers without panicking and negotiate without showing weakness. My brother was supposed to be learning the business, but he treated meetings like photo opportunities and budgets like suggestions. I came in for 1 quarter to stabilize a refinancing package and stayed for years because every time I tried to leave, there was another emergency. The contractor sued. The permits stalled, the market shifted. My brother needed another chance. My mother would take my hand across the kitchen table and tell me families show up for each other. What she meant was that I should show up for them. Nobody ever asked what showing up had cost me. Nobody cared that I built my own career in the hours they left me after I had finished saving theirs. That morning, in Naomi's office, while the calls kept rolling in, we laid every document out in order. The more we stacked, the clearer the pattern became. My private investment company had not just provided bridge funding. It held a secured interest in the River North property everyone in my family bragged about like it was proof of their genius. My contribution had been structured quietly because my father hated the idea of outsiders knowing his daughter was rescuing him. He had insisted on discretion to protect the family name. In reality, he wanted credit without accountability. Naomi traced the chain of entities with her pen and said very calmly, "If they default, you can force a restructuring. If fraud is proven, your brother is exposed personally." Caleb sent over more files, expense reports, wire confirmations, internal emails, 1 hotel bill in Las Vegas that had been coded as consultant lodging, 2 luxury watch purchases buried under equipment fees, a payment to a private sportsbook runner that was disguised as a marketing retainer. I did not feel shocked. I felt tired. Deeply, bone deeply, tired. Because once you have known someone your whole life, there is a terrible grief in seeing exactly how small they are. By early afternoon, I knew something else. The papers my family had pushed in front of me the night before they cut me off were not routine collateral papers like my father claimed. They were designed to pull my downtown condo into a last-minute personal pledge package and shift more liability onto me while giving my brother even more operational control. If I had signed them, I would have been tied to the collapse while he stayed protected behind a corporate shell. My mother had known at least part of that. One of her texts from earlier that week made it obvious. Stop overthinking and just do this for your brother. We can sort out details later. Details. In my family, details were where the traps lived. That evening, I finally drove past the Hinsdale house I grew up in. I did not go in. I parked half a block away and watched lights move behind the windows. My mother was in the front sitting room, pacing with one hand against her forehead. My father stood in the study on speakerphone, gesturing the way he did when he wanted to sound in control. My brother stormed from room to room like rage could solve arithmetic. For a second, from that distance, they almost looked like a normal family in trouble. Then my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. It was from a subcontractor I had met twice. He wrote, "I do not know what is happening, but I figured you should know your brother told people he can make this go away once he gets your assets tied in." I read it 3 times. Then I started the engine and drove away. At 10 that night, Naomi called me with the final piece we needed. One of the signatures on a transfer request from 3 months earlier did not match mine. She wanted permission to bring in a forensic examiner immediately. I gave it. The next morning, we had preliminary confirmation that my signature had most likely been forged on documents authorizing an internal funds movement from a reserve account tied to my entity. That was the moment the whole thing changed for me. Before then, this had been a family that used me. After that, it became a family that stole from me and planned to bury me with the damage. Naomi asked if I wanted to initiate the first legal notice before the anniversary party that Saturday. I thought about it for a long time. Then I said no, let them hold their celebration. Let them put on the perfect clothes, order the champagne, pose in front of the flowers, and smile at people who only know the edited version. Then I will show up with the truth. Some silences are weakness. Mine was a countdown. My parents' 30th anniversary party was supposed to be a rescue mission disguised as a celebration. My mother had spent weeks planning it as if candles and imported linen could cover a financial hemorrhage. She wanted investors there, old friends with money there, board members there, people who might write checks if they believed the family name still meant stability. The invitation had promised an elegant evening honoring love, legacy, and the future. By 6:30 that Saturday, half the guests who mattered had either canceled or sent apologies through assistants. Rumors had already started moving through the city. Vendors had heard about delayed payments. One donor who used to attend every family event suddenly had another commitment. A lender my father had bragged about all spring never arrived. Still, my mother refused to cancel. That was her gift and her curse. She could stand in the middle of smoke and insist everyone compliment the chandelier. I arrived 10 minutes after sunset in a black dress simple enough to look effortless and expensive enough to irritate everyone who had ever called me cold for being competent. Naomi came with me, not because I needed moral support, but because I wanted witnesses. When the valet opened my car door, I could already hear music spilling across the lawn. The house was lit like a magazine spread. For a second, I remembered being 12 years old on those front steps, holding a tray of candles for one of my mother's holiday parties, thinking families that looked polished must be safe inside. I almost laughed at that girl. The first person who saw me was my father. Martin Cross had always been a handsome man in the kind of practiced way that mattered too much to him. That night, he looked 10 years older. He crossed the entry hall fast, trying not to seem rushed. "Elena, thank God," he said, and reached for my elbow like he could steer me somewhere private. I stepped back before he touched me. "We are not doing this in a side room," I said. His jaw tightened. "Your mother is barely holding it together. Call off whatever this is." My mother heard my voice and appeared almost instantly. Diane Cross had built her whole identity around control. Hair perfect, smile trained, pain hidden until it could be weaponized. She stopped 3 feet away from me and stared as if she could burn me down with embarrassment alone. "How dare you show up here after what you have done?" she said. I looked around at the guests pretending not to listen and said, "I came because this seemed like the right place to discuss family decisions." My brother pushed through the crowd a second later, already flushed with anger, already on his second or third drink by the look of him. Evan was the kind of man people mistook for impressive until they listened too closely. He had our father's confidence without any of the discipline, and our mother's love of appearances without her work ethic. He smiled at me in that ugly way I had hated since we were teenagers. "Put it back," he said under his breath, "tonight. Or I swear to God you will regret it." Naomi stepped slightly closer, and that was when my mother finally noticed I had not come alone. "Who is this?" she snapped. "My counsel," I said. The word landed exactly how I wanted it to. People near the bar stopped pretending not to hear. My father lowered his voice and tried one last time to sound reasonable. "Elena, you are making a scene." "No," I said. "Your texts did that. I only brought paperwork." Then I handed him the first envelope. Notice of withdrawal, notice of default review, demand for preservation of records. It was not a foreclosure notice. It was better. It was the beginning of consequences, written in language no amount of charm could soften. My father read the top page, and whatever was left of his public face started to crack. My mother snatched a copy and skimmed until she reached the line explaining that certain representations made by company officers might expose them to additional review for fraud. Her eyes went straight to my brother. Just for a second, but I saw it. She knew enough to be afraid. Evan lunged toward me then, not with his hands, but with his voice, louder now, desperate now. "You are insane. You are trying to destroy your own parents because you are bitter and alone." Some guests actually flinched. I did not. I looked right at him and said, "I did not destroy anything. I stopped financing your lies." Silence hit the room like broken glass. My mother took one step forward and raised her hand. She never got close enough to touch me because Naomi intercepted her, and 2 event staff turned at exactly the wrong moment to witness it. A whisper spread through the room, then another. My father closed his eyes for 1 second, and in that second I knew he finally understood there would be no smoothing this over. I leaned in just enough for all 3 of them to hear me clearly. "You wanted me gone when you thought I was only useful. Now you get to find out what life looks like without access to me." Then I turned and walked toward the back terrace. I could feel the entire party shifting behind me, conversations splintering, alliances recalculating, sympathy rearranging itself in real time. My mother followed me out, heels striking hard against the stone. Her voice broke the moment we were alone enough. "Please, Elena," she said, and there it was, the first real crack, not outrage, not performance, but fear. "We can fix this privately. Do not humiliate us." I looked at her and almost asked the question that had lived in my throat for years. "When exactly were you planning to stop humiliating me?" Instead, I said the only thing that mattered. "You did not cut me out because I failed you. You cut me out because I would not let you use me one more time." She started crying then, fast and hard, the kind of crying that would have undone me when I was younger. But grief without accountability is just another manipulation with better lighting. I left her on that terrace with mascara on her cheeks, and guests pretending not to stare through the windows. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel guilty for walking away. The morning after the party, everything accelerated. Maybe public embarrassment did what private pleading could not. Maybe panic finally loosened the grip of loyalty on the people inside the company. Or maybe the truth had been trying to surface for a long time and only needed one hard shove. By noon, Caleb had connected us with an internal project manager willing to turn over archived emails. By 3, we had statements from 2 employees confirming that Evan regularly instructed staff to relabel personal expenses as development costs. By evening, Naomi's forensic examiner sent a stronger report on the forged signature. It was not just likely. It was highly probable. My brother had signed my name to authorize the movement of funds he was never entitled to touch, and he had done it while negotiating behind the scenes to push more exposure onto me through those condo pledge papers. My father came to my office alone on Monday, which told me more than anything he could have said. Martin Cross did not come alone unless he had run out of people willing to stand beside him. He looked smaller in daylight. Not poorer yet, but diminished. The kind of man still wearing an expensive watch after time has already beaten him. He sat across from me, set his phone on the table face down, and said, "We need to handle this as a family." I almost smiled. That phrase had carried so much power in our house. It used to mean forgive, absorb, cover, sacrifice. It used to mean Elena will clean it up. Now it meant he was scared. I slid a folder toward him. Inside was a copy of the report, the bank notices, the expense summaries, and one printed email chain from 6 weeks earlier in which my mother wrote, "If Elena keeps dragging her feet, we move without her and deal with the fallout later." My father read all of it in silence. When he got to the signature page, his hand trembled just once. "Did you know?" I asked. He did not answer fast enough. That was answer enough. I asked again, quieter this time. "Did you know he signed my name?" He rubbed a hand over his mouth and said, "I knew there were temporary measures." Temporary measures? My brother forged my name and stole from an account linked to my company, and my father still reached for language that sounded gentler than truth. I stood up then because sitting felt impossible. "You let him do it," I said. "You let him risk my life to protect his image." My father stood too, but not in anger, in defeat. He said he thought he could fix it before I ever found out. He said Evan was under pressure. He said the market had turned, investors were nervous, and if the project failed, everything the family built would collapse. Everything the family built. That phrase was another lie. I had built half of it and kept the rest from sinking. He knew that. He just never wanted to say it out loud. When I told him Naomi was preparing civil claims and referring the forged signature evidence for criminal review if necessary, he shut his eyes and whispered, "He is your brother." I said, "And I was your daughter when you helped him do this." He left without touching the folder. 2 hours later, my mother called from a number I had not blocked. I answered because I wanted to hear what truth sounded like in her mouth. It turned out to sound like blame dressed as sorrow. She said families say cruel things under stress. She said I knew how hard it had been for my brother to find his footing. She said my father had only agreed with the text because he was trying to prevent a bigger explosion. She said I had always been so strong that people leaned on me without realizing how much they were taking. That was the closest she had ever come to an apology, and even then she managed to make exploitation sound accidental. I asked one question. If I had signed those papers and the project collapsed, were you prepared to let me lose my condo too? She went silent. Then she said, "We would have figured something out." There it was again. The family creed. Use Elena now. Figure out the damage later. My brother did not call. He showed up at my building after dark and waited by the entrance until I came down with security. His hair was unwashed, his shirt wrinkled, his confidence finally punctured. For the first time since we were kids, he looked like someone who understood he might not be protected. He asked to speak alone. I refused. He laughed without humor and said, "You always loved this, did you not? The power, the chance to prove you were smarter than everyone." I said nothing. He took a step closer anyway. "Fine. You want the truth." I moved the money. I was going to put it back after the next round came through. I needed room to breathe. You had money sitting there doing nothing while I was carrying this whole project. Carrying. I almost could not process how thoroughly he believed his own mythology. "You stole from me," I said. "You forged my name." He clenched his jaw and looked past me toward the revolving doors. Then he said the only honest thing I had heard from him in years. "They would never have chosen you over me." That sentence did more damage than the forged signature ever could. Because it confirmed what I had known in pieces and denied in whole. This was not just about one theft. It was about a family structure built around excusing one child and consuming the other. I asked him if he was sorry. He looked me right in the face and said, "I am sorry you found out like this." Security took one step forward. I did not need them. I was suddenly calmer than I had ever been. That was the end of the emotional part for me. After that, it was administration. We filed formal notice. We froze access where we could. Naomi sent settlement conditions that were brutal but fair. Evan would resign immediately, surrender any claim to management, cooperate with the forensic review, and accept personal liability for misappropriated funds. My father would step aside during restructuring and provide full records. My mother would stop contacting business partners with false narratives and issue a correction where necessary. If they complied, we would prioritize civil resolution before pushing for criminal escalation. If they fought, we would proceed publicly. For 2 days they fought. Then the bank made its own calls. A vendor threatened suit, and one board advisor resigned in writing, citing concerns about governance and exposure. Suddenly my conditions no longer looked cruel. They looked like mercy. My brother signed first. My father signed next. My mother waited until the last hour and then wrote her name so hard the pen tore the page. I watched each signature come through by email and felt nothing triumphant, only clear. Sometimes the most satisfying justice is not loud. Sometimes it is simply the moment the people who broke you realize the old version of you is gone forever. Consequences never arrive all at once the way revenge fantasies imagine. They come in layers, invoices, sales, meetings nobody wants to attend, calls that stop getting returned. The first visible change was the house. Not lost immediately, not marched out of in a single dramatic afternoon, but stripped of certainty. The lender initiated review, the restructuring team valued assets, and suddenly the place my mother had treated like a stage set became what it had always really been, a property with numbers attached to it. The second change was social. Invitations dried up. Not because everyone in our circle was moral, but because scandal is contagious, and nobody likes sitting too close to a family whose books might be under examination. My mother canceled luncheons she would once have died to host. My father resigned from 2 charitable boards before they could ask questions in public. My brother vanished from the polished restaurants he used to haunt and reappeared only in parking lots outside meetings with lawyers who now billed him by the hour. Under the settlement, Evan had to liquidate what was in his name. The sports car went first, the watch collection next. Then the condo lease he could barely afford even before the company started bleeding. He wanted sympathy for that. He actually told one attorney it was humiliating. The humiliating part, to me, had been watching him play Prince with money he did not earn while my mother praised his ambition and called my caution cold. My father spent weeks trying to salvage pieces of the business. To his credit, he finally stopped lying once the lies became too expensive to maintain. He admitted to the board that governance had failed. He admitted he had allowed family dynamics to override judgment. He did not say my name often in those meetings from what Caleb later told me, but when he did, he stopped talking about me like a difficult daughter and started talking about me like the creditor and executive he should have respected years earlier. It was late, but it was real. My mother had a harder landing. Money had always been practical to my father and symbolic to Evan. To my mother, it was emotional architecture. It meant status, security, proof that sacrifice had been worth it. When the designer bags started disappearing from her closet because she was quietly selling them through a broker, that was the first time she understood this was not a temporary storm. When the anniversary photos vanished from her social media because strangers kept asking about investigations in the comments, that was the second. She came to see me one afternoon 3 weeks after the settlement. Alone this time. Hair tied back. No sunglasses. No performance. She looked like someone who had been forced to meet herself without makeup for the first time in decades. She said she used to tell herself she was protecting the family. Then she said something I had not expected. I think I was protecting the version of the family that made me feel important. It was the most honest sentence I had ever heard from her. I did not hug her. I did not tell her it was all right. But I listened. That was more grace than she had given me when I needed it. The restructuring closed in stages. My entity took control of the secured position, and the River North property was moved into a cleaner framework with new oversight, and none of my family in charge. I did not keep the business as a trophy. I rebuilt the viable parts, protected the employees who had not lied, and sold one segment to a partner who actually knew how to operate without turning every room into a family court. Some people expected me to keep squeezing until there was nothing left. That was never the point. I did not want ashes. I wanted boundaries and truth. The money recovered from the settlement could have gone into another deal, another fund, another number on a statement no one would remember in a year. Instead, I used a significant portion to establish the Cross Grant for women launching businesses after financial abuse, family coercion, or forced dependency. Naomi thought the name was a little theatrical at first. I told her that was exactly why I liked it. If my family name was going to mean anything in Chicago after this, I wanted it attached to women learning how not to disappear inside other people's entitlement. The press release was short. The first grant cycle was private. No dramatic interviews, no victory lap. But word got around anyway. It always does when a woman stops being useful to the people who drained her and starts becoming useful to people who want to live. My brother called me once more before the end of that summer. He was in Florida then, working for a logistics firm through a connection one of his lawyers had made, living in a one-bedroom apartment with no valet, no bottle service, and no one interested in stories about what his last name used to buy him. He said he hated me. I said that was fine. Then he asked if I had ever loved him at all. I answered more honestly than either of us deserved. I love the person I kept waiting for you to become. He did not speak after that. Neither did I. We ended the call, and that was that. People think revenge is about making someone suffer the way you suffered. It is not. Real revenge, the kind that actually changes your life, is refusing to keep paying for the system that hurt you. A year later, I stood in my new office on the 34th floor overlooking a colder, cleaner version of the city than the one I used to race through trying to save everyone but myself. The business I had rebuilt was smaller than my father's old empire on paper and stronger in every way that mattered. No hidden leaks, no family payroll ghosts, no emotional blackmail disguised as loyalty, just work, contracts, people who earn their seats, and peace so unfamiliar at first it felt like a sound I had forgotten existed. The Cross Grant had funded 11 women in its first year. One opened a bookkeeping firm after her parents spent a decade taking out debt in her name. Another launched a catering company after leaving a marriage where every dollar she made was treated like community property, and every dollar he spent was treated like his right. A third wrote me a letter that sat in my desk drawer for months because I could only read 2 lines at a time without crying. She thanked me for teaching her that saying no was not cruelty. It was self-respect with a voice. That was the part none of us were raised on enough, especially daughters. We are taught how to absorb, how to smooth, how to understand, how to excuse, how to love people through their worst patterns until their worst patterns become our daily weather. What we are not taught often enough is that boundaries are not betrayals, that love without respect is not love, that family can be sacred and still be unsafe, that forgiveness, if it ever comes, does not require restored access. My parents sent me a handwritten card on the anniversary of the text that changed everything. Not a request. Not a guilt trip, just a note. My father wrote that he had spent the year learning the difference between peacekeeping and cowardice. My mother wrote that she finally understood how often she had called control devotion and called dependence closeness. She said she was sorry for the text, for the pressure, for asking me to prove love by sacrificing myself over and over. The apology did not erase anything. It did not rebuild trust or restore the years I spent carrying weight that should never have been mine. But it mattered because it was finally clean. No hidden invoice attached. I wrote back 3 weeks later. I told them I accepted the apology. I told them I hoped they stayed healthy and honest. I told them I was not ready for holidays, family dinners, or a return to how things were. That last part was important, because some endings are merciful precisely because they are not reversible. My brother did not write. Through other people, I heard enough to know he kept a job for once. He was learning schedules, consequences, and the humiliating but necessary fact that the world does not owe you comfort because your family used to arrange it. Good. Some lessons only stick when life teaches them in a language pride hates. As for me, I no longer flinch when my phone lights up unexpectedly. I no longer confuse being needed with being loved. I no longer walk into rooms assuming I have to make myself smaller to keep other people from breaking. If there is any lesson in what happened, it is not that you should turn cold or stop caring. It is that care without wisdom becomes a weapon in the hands of selfish people. It is that generosity needs structure or it becomes a drain. It is that the people closest to you do not get a lifetime exemption from decency simply because they share your last name. And maybe most of all, it is this: the day someone tells you that you are no longer family because you finally refused to be used, believe them the first time. Then go build a life that does not need their permission to feel whole. If you have ever been made to feel guilty for protecting your peace, I hope you remember my story the next time your no gets treated like a crime. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the future version of you is to let the door close, lock it without shaking, and walk forward anyway. If you were in my place, would you have let them back in, or would you have kept the distance and chosen peace over blood? Tell me what you think.